How you doing there? Welcome back to Babble on Talmud. Today we're studying Daf Mem Beis, Daf 42 of Masechtas Zevachim. Friends, today we are going to continue the discussion that we began yesterday about Mefaglin, Bechatzi, Matir / does anybody actually hold of Mefaglin, Bechatzi, Matir? What does Mefaglin, Bechatzi, Matir even mean? Well, be'etzem what it means is, in our context, let's say we have a chatas apnimi. Let's say we have a chatas that is offered on the inner mizbeach, that all 4 applications of blood on the mizbeach apnimi are required. They must be done. If any of them are missing, if you only do 3 out of the 4, for example, so then the korban is possible. Yeah, you have to do all 4 of them. Unlike, of course, the chatas achitzon, where once you've done 1 already, you're technically yotze. Now, so therefore, the matir, what does the matir even mean? Well, if we take the example of the korban of an animal, well, the matir is what basically allows the korban to, so to speak, like progress, to allow the meat to now be eaten by the kohanim, to allow the emurim to be burnt on the mizbech. In order to allow for these things to happen, you have to have zrikas adam. What's considered zrikas adam? By chatas achitzon. So once you've already done 1 application of blood, what's the word? Nisinas? I think there was like a word that I'm thinking of, but I can't think of it right now. But once you would do 1 application of the blood, already technically the matir has been offered, and now the kohen can eat the meat, the emurim can be burnt, etc. by a chatas apnimi. All 4 of the applications of blood must be applied. So now that that's the case, what happens if the kohen has machshaves chutz lizmano for only 1 of the 4 applications of blood? So we saw yesterday the opinion of the Chacham, who said that it's only can be considered pigul, right? Ein karis ad sheyifaga b'chol hamatir. The Chacham had said that it's only going to be pigul once the entire matir has been offered. In the case of achatas apnimi, so until all of the blood, I would choose by chatas apnimi. There's also going to be the sprinkling of the blood on the parochis. But let's just focus for a second on the applications of the mizbeach hazav. So it can only be pigul if there was machshavas chutz lizmano by all of the 4 applications of the blood on the mizbeach apnimi. So then what happens though? So now in our Mishnah we had said, well, okay, let's not even get into our Mishnah for now. I don't want to go down that route, but I will just say, let me actually just quote the Brisa, the Mishnah from Menachos that we had mentioned yesterday, that pigal b'chometz v'lo b'lavona v'lo b'chometz, right? B'chometz, right? So for example, by the way, just as an aside, right, I knew that this was going to happen, right? I knew that we were starting a big sugya yesterday and that I was going to have to do a lot of catch-up today. I was even debating if whether I should just do this whole sugya in today's daf, but it was just too much to have as part of today's shir. But as we've discussed in the past, whenever you kind of go into a sugya in the middle, there's a lot of catch-up to do. I had a feeling there was going to be a lot of catch-up. But anyways, we saw a Mishnah yesterday from Menachos where, right, by korban mincha, so you have to burn, when it comes to burning a korban mincha, there's the kometz that gets burned, and there's also the levona that gets burned. So if one only had machshavas chutz lizmano by the kometz, but not by the levona, or vice versa, so Reb Meir had said it would still be pigul. The Chacham had said it's only pigul if you have machshavas chutz lizmano, both by the kometz as well as by the levona. Now, when it comes to Reb Meir's shita, that is where we've been trying to work through and try to figure out what exactly does Reb Meir hold. Right, when Reb Meir says that if there was machshavas chutz lizmano just by the kometz, but not by the levona, or just by the levona, but not by the kometz, how come he says that there's pigul? Does he say that there's pigul because simply, and this is really getting into today's daf, right? Does he say that there is pigol because Mefaglin Bechatzi Matir, does Reb Meir simply say that even if only part of the Matir, right, when it comes to a Korban Mincha, the Kometz needs to be burned and the Levona needs to be burned in order to allow the Shiari Mincha to be eaten by the Kohanim. So, is it that Reb Meir simply says that even if there's pigol by part of the Matir, if there was pigol by Machshavas Chutz Zmanu by the Kometz or by the Levona, so that's already considered pigol. You don't need, like the Chacham said, you would have to have Machshavas Chutz Zmanu both by the Kometz as well as by the Levona. Is it that Reb Meir simply says that's not? Reb Meir simply disagrees and says that even Machshavas Chutz Zmanu by just one of them would suffice, or like Rish Lakish suggested, and now we're getting even closer into today's daf, because really we're trying to go back and forth and this and that on Rish Lakish's shita, that Rish Lakish argues that according to Reb Meir, it's not that he simply says Mefaglin Bechatzi Matir, that it's already pigol if you have Machshavas Chutz Zmanu even just by part of the Matir. So even if you have Machshavas Chutz Zmanu just by the Chometz, or by the Kometz, or by the Levona, it's already going to be pigol. No, it's more subtle than that. Reb Meir actually holds, according to Rish Lakish, that kol ha-ose al das rishona hu ose. I think that was the phrase. I can't find it right now, but I think it's called. Yeah, there it is. Kol ha-ose al das rishona hu ose. Yeah, biduk. So actually, says Rish Lakish that Reb Meir's shita is that when somebody does something, he does it based on the initial way, on the first thing that he does. Meaning, if the kometz was with machshavas chutz lizmanu, so then when he does the levona without any particular intention, the assumption is that it is the same intention as the first part, i.e., also machshavas chutz lizmanu. So it's not that Reb Meir says Mefaglin Bechatzi Matir, that it's pigol even just with part of the Matir, with just the kometz or just the levona. No. Reb Meir also holds that you would have to have machshavas chutz lizmanu by both the kometz as well as by the levona. However, Reb Meir holds that by having machshavas chutz lizmanu by the kometz, that applies to the levona as well, because the assumption is that the machshava that you had for the first step for the kometz, or if the levona was first, then for the levona is going to determine the machshava for the second step. And therefore, Reb Meir doesn't simply say that Mefaglin Bechatzi Matir. No, it says Mefaglin by the entire Matir, just that he's willing to say that based on the initial intention, we can assume that the entire intention, that the continuation of the intention follows the beginning of the intention. Now, that was a very big sort of way to catch us up into today's sugya. Yeah, I had a feeling that we're going to require a big catch up over here. So, what's on the agenda today for today's daf? This discussion that we just had right now. Is Rish Lakish correct? Is Reb Meir's shita really about kol ha'osa das rishono ose and not Mefaglin Bechatzi Matir? Maybe it is Mefaglin Bechatzi Matir, and we're going to be kind of going back and forth trying to understand if Rish Lakish really has this right or not. That is really what we have on today's daf Mem Beis of Masechta Zevachim. Finally, here we go. All right, friends, we're going to begin on daf Mem Aleph Amid Beis, 2 lines from the bottom. Meisvei, we have a question on Rish Lakish. So when do we say that one matana is enough? That if you have machshavas pigol by the first matana alone, I think matana was the word I was looking for earlier, that if you have machshavas pigol, machshavas chutz lizmanu, just by the first matana of dam alone, so then it would be pigol. So that is by anitan al mizbeach achitzon. That is by achatas achitzon. Avol dam anitan al mizbeach apnimi. Oh, but what about achatas apnimi? So now listen up. Kigon, ayboim v'shalosh sheyom kippurim. The 43 applications of blood on Yom Kippur. Chaver, what are the 43 applications of blood on Yom Kippur? Well, on Yom Kippur there are 2 korbanos that are offered, right? Two chatos apnimios. You have the par for the kohanim, and you have the goat for the rest of Am Yisrael. Both go lifnai v'lifnim to the Kodesh HaKadoshim. Both are then in the Heichel. And what happens is, in the Kodesh HaKadoshim, there's 8 sprinklings, right? Achas lamala v'sheva lamata, both for the cow, as well as for the sheep, as well as for the goat. So that is 8 plus 8 is 16. Same thing on the paroches in the Heichel. So another 8 and 8 is 16. So 16 and 16 is 32. Then you mix together the bloods of the cow and of the goat. And then you do another 4 on the Mizbeach Apnimi, on the Mizbeach Hazov. So 32 and 4 is 36. And then on the top of the Mizbeach Hazov, there's another 7 sprinklings, which is another 7. So 36 and 7 is 43. That is how we get to 43 applications of blood on Yom Kippur. And they are done in kind of 4 different groups, right? There's the group in the Kodesh HaKadoshim, right? Let's say if we're talking about the cow. So there's a group of 8 in the Kodesh HaKadoshim. There's another group of 8 in the Heichel by the Parochis. Another group of 4 on the Mizbach Hazav. And a number 7 on top of the Mizbach Hazav. So Kagon Arboim V'Shalosh Shel Yom HaKippurim Ve'achad Oser Shel Par Koin Mashiach Ve'achad Oser Shel Par Elam Davar Shel Tzibur. And by Par Koin Mashiach, as well as by Par Elam Davar Shel Tzibur, these Chatos Apnimios. So there is, of course, the 4 matanos on the 4 kronos of the Mizbeach HaPnimi, but there's also the 7 by the paroches in the Heichel, both by the Param Davar Shel Tzibur as well as by the Par Kohen Gadol. So those each have 11. Pigel bein barishona uvein bashniya uvein bashlishis. This is important. Rav Meir Omer Pigel v'chachavim olav karis v'chachavim omim ein bo karis atchivag b'chol Matir. So if we take, for example, Yom Kippur, which has all of these different sections, right? There's the Matan Damim in the Kodesh HaKadoshim. There's the Matan Damim in the Heichel, on the Paroches, on the corners of the Mizbach Hazav, on the top of the Mizbach Hazav. So says Reb Meir, right? So we said Pigel Bein Barishona. So whether when he was in the Kodesh HaKadoshim, for that group of 8, he had Machsheves Chutz Lizmanu, Uvein B'Shniya, or maybe when he went out to the Heichel and was doing the sprinkling on the Paroches, maybe then he had Machsheves Chutz Lizmanu. Uvein Bashlishis, or maybe when he was sprinkling the blood applying the blood to the Mizbach Hazav, he had Machsheves Chutz Lizmanu. Reb Meir Omer Pigel, B'chayin Olav Karis. Says Reb Meir, it's Pigel and it's Chayiv Karis. Now this is interesting. Why is it interesting? Well, Rish Lakish had said that according to Reb Meir, Rish Lakish had said that Reb Meir does not hold of Mefaglin Bechatzi Matir. According to Rish Lakish, Reb Meir does not say that you could simply just have Machshav's Chutz Lizmanu by any part of the Matir. What's the Matir in this case? All of the blood, right? There's lots of blood. There's 43 applications of blood on Yom Kippur. You have the Par, you have the Sur, you have the Kodesh HaKodashim, all the different ones in the Heichel. Right? So as I said earlier, we divide it into like different sections, right? So the first part would be the part in the Kodesh HaKodashim. The next part is by the Parochas Neichel, and then by the Karnas Mizbech, and then on the top of the Mizbech. So says Reb Meir, whether you had Machshavas Chutz Lizmanu on part 1 in the Kodesh HaKodashim, or whether on part 2 by the Parochas Neichel, whether by part 3 by the Mizbech in the Heichel as well. If you had Machshavas Chutz Lizmanu, Pigel v'chayav and olav karis. So what's so interesting about that? Well, Rish Lakish had said that according to Reb Meir, it's only Pigel because when it's Kol ha'osa das rishono ose, when the Machshavas Pigel, so according to Reb Meir, he says you don't necessarily need to have Machshavas Chutz Lizmanu for the entirety of the Matir, but you must at least have Machshavas Chutz Lizmanu at the beginning of the Matir, which will basically set the stage for the rest of it, right? That will be the default intention. The first intention is the default intention for the rest. However, Rish Lakish wanted to say, and as we learned yesterday, we wanted to possibly bring a ride from our Mishnah, possibly that, you see, our Mishnah says that the first three are with no intention, but the last one is with machshavas chutz manu, it is not pigul, because the machshav is at the end, implying that if machshavas chutz manu is at the beginning, it would be pigul, right? So Rish Lakish wants to say that according to Reb Meir, it's not that he simply says Mefaglin Bechatzi Matir, but that if you can have machshavas pigul for only part of the matir, it would have to be at the very beginning. And yet, what do we see here? We're saying whether he had machshava bein barishona, bein bashniya, bein bashlishis, even if the machshavas chutz manu was once he got into the azara, meaning he did the sprinkling of the blood in the Kodesh Kodashim, perfect. But then he got into the heichel, I don't know if I said azara, but then he got into the heichel, and that's when he has machshavas chutz manu. Says Reb Meir, that would be pigul, even though the initial intention was all gravy, was all good. Right, so again, pigel bein barishona, whether he had machshavas chutz manu when he was in the Kodesh Kodashim, uvein bashniya, whether he had machshav, maybe when he was in the Kodesh Kodashim was all good. Yeah, he had mamish the highest of the highest intentions, but then he got out to the heichel, and then he had machshavas chutz manu. Uvein bashlishis, or when he was applying the blood to the mizbeach hazav, Reb Meir says Reb Meir pigel v'chayv love karis. Says Reb Meir, that's pigel. The Chacham, of course, say ein bo karis hachi yifagel b'chol matir. Whereas the Chacham say that it's for it to be pigul, you'd have to have machshavas chutz manu by the entire matir, by all of the blood, Kodesh HaKodashim, all the different things in the heichal. You'd have to have machshavas chutz manu for all of it, not just for part of it. So katani mia pigel bein barishona, bein bashniya, bein bashlishis ufalid. So we see, as I explained, that according to Reb Meir, if the machshavas chutz manu, regardless of if it was by stage 1 in the Kodesh Kodashim or any of the latter stages, if at any point you had machshavas chutz manu, it would be pigul. Not just at the beginning. Omer of Yitzchak bar Ovin. So if Yitzchak bar Ovin comes up with an interesting mahalach, and he says, Hochav mayaskinon kigon shepigel b'shchita dechad matir hu shish. Who wants to explain this to us? The Gemara doesn't say very much. There's a lot more that the Gemara doesn't say. What this means is that you can still explain Rish Lakish, that according to Reb Meir, Kol ha'osa das rishono ose, and that it's only going to be pigul if the initial intention was chutz lezmanu. So then how do we explain when Reb Meir says that even if he had a chutz lezmanu by the second, by the second stage, like by the heichel? Because that was talking about a scenario where, he did the all the work in the Kodesh HaKodashim, perfect. But then what happened was, the blood spilled on the floor, the blood was gone. And therefore, new blood had to be, therefore a new korban had to be brought. The blood spilled on the floor, it was gone, a new korban had to be brought. And it was on the shchita of that new korban. So when we're saying bein bashniya, it means that the blood of the first animal spilled on the floor. Then a new korban was brought, a new animal was brought, and then during the shchita of that new animal, this is the shniya, right? We're up now to the second step of the blood, but it spilled on the floor, so now I had to bring a new animal. And during the shchita of that animal, there was machshavas chutz lezmanu. So therefore, it's machshavas chutz lezmanu on the shchita. And that's where Reb Meir would say that it's pigul and you're chayiv kores. So again, Amr Yitzchak bar Ovin says, what are we talking about when Reb Meir says that whether you're chayiv kores when you have machshavas chutz lezmanu by stage 2? Kigon shepigol b'shchita. It's talking about where the initial blood spilled on the floor and they had to bring a new animal. And it was during the shchita of that second animal that there was machshavas chutz lezmanu. Dechad matir, that is just one matir, right? In that case, it's just the shchita, and there was machshavas chutz lezmanu. If that's the case, my time of the Rabbanon. So ask the Gemara, okay, but then why would the Rabbanon disagree? Why would they say that it's not pigul? Right? If we're talking about shchita and there's machshava of chutz lezmanu by shchita, Shouldn't the Chacham agree that it should be pigul by shchita? So it says here in the Gemara, Rabbi Eliezer, but I'm going to change it to Rabbi Elazar because we're quoting different Mishnayos where I think it's Rabbi Elazar, because we're going to quote Rabbi Elazar together with Rabbi Shimon. Rabbi Elazar and Rabbi Shimon were contemporaries, Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Shimon were not contemporaries. So Man Chacham Rabbi Elazar, it's the Shita of Rabbi Elazar. Very, very interesting. That's not that we learn in a Mishnah, in Menachis. HaKometz va'alevona v'aktorias u'minchas kan u'minchas kohen Mashiach u'minchas nisachim sheikriv me'achas me'en kazayis b'chutz chayv Rabbi Elazar pota she'ikarev at'yakriv eskulan. What does this mean? It's taka very interesting. I'm going to read it again. Tetnan HaKometz, okay, so when it comes to a kometz, right, so if you have a korban mincha and you take a fistful from the korban mincha, and then what happens if you then take a kezayis of that kometz and you offer it outside of the azara, outside of the Beis Hamikdash, outside where you're not on the mizbeach where it's supposed to go? You take a kezayis of it and you offer it in some other place. V'alevona, or the frankincense, v'aktoris, or incense, minchas kohanim, the korban mincha of kohanim, which is the entire korban min. Right, when it comes to minchas kohanim, it is burnt in its entirety, not just a kometz, but the whole mincha. Minchas kohen Mashiach, also the minchas chavitin, the korban mincha that the kohen gadol would bring every day. Minchas nisachim, or a korban mincha that would come together with a korban. Shikriv me'achas me'en kazayis b'chutz chayv. That someone took a kazayis from these korbanos, right? From the kometz, from the levona, whatever it was. He took a kazayis of it and offered it outside of the azara in a place that right b'chutz where it's not allowed. Chayv. So Tanakam says that you're going to be chayv for that because you're taking a kazayis of something that needs to be offered inside and you're offering it outside. So you're going to be chayv for that. Rabbi Elazar potet she'akriv es kulam. So this is very interesting. So Rabbi Elazar says potter, because you're only offering a kazayis of it. You'd have to offer the whole thing. Now, what's interesting about Rabbi Elazar's shita, Chav, you want to hear what's interesting about Rabbi Elazar's shita? What's interesting is that Rabbi Elazar, however, agrees that in the following scenario, if, let's say we're talking about a kometz, if the entirety of the kometz was burnt on the mizbeach, but a kazayis of it was left over, and then the kohen took that kazayis outside of the azar and burnt it outside of the azar, Rabbi Elazar agrees there that he would be chayiv for that, which is interesting. So when he simply takes a kazayis and brings it outside of the azar and burns it, so Rabbi Elazar says that he's going to be potter for that. He's only going to be chayiv if he burns the entire kometz. However, Rabbi Elazar also says that if the entirety of the kometz was burnt on the mizbeach as it should be, but a kazayis of it was left over and was burnt outside of the azar, Rabbi Elazar agrees he'd be chayiv. What's interesting about that? What's interesting about that is Rabbi Elazar agrees that a kazayis is a shear that you would be chayiv for. However, when it's in sort of a bigger picture, when it's just one kazayis of a bigger picture, Rabbi Elazar would say that you're potter, right? When you're just taking a kazayis from the kometz and burning it outside, but there's still the whole rest of the kometz, Rabbi Elazar would say you're potter for that. And therefore, how does that apply to our Gemara? Well, we're talking about, right, to bring us back to where we were, we're talking about it's Yom Kippur. The Kohen Gadol was in the Kodesh HaKodashim. He sprinkled the blood by the Aron. All good. Now he comes out to the Heichal and all the blood spills on the floor. Okay, so you bring a new korban and you slaughter the new korban, and while you're slaughtering the korban, you have machsheves chutz mano. Now this shrita, this korban, is just one detail of a much bigger picture of Yom Kippur, right? There's the blood that's going into the Kodesh HaKadoshim. There's the Heichal, there's the Paroches, there's the Mizbach Hazav, there's on top. It's just one aspect of a much bigger thing. So therefore, Rabbi Elazar would say that even though shchita in general, of course, as we know by pigul, if you slaughter a korban with machsheves chutz mano, it'll be pigul, sure. But in this particular context, where this shchita is just one small detail in a much bigger picture of Yom Kippur, of a much bigger matir, that in order for the avodah to be done properly, there's 42 applications of blood that need to happen in different parts of the Beis Hamikdash, the Kodesh HaKodashim, the Heichal. So while in general, yes, shchita would, machshavas chutzes manu by shchita would of course make pigul, but in this context, where there's so much more going on, Rabbi Elazar would say that this shchita would not make pigul, so therefore the chachamim are saying man chacham, it's Rabbi Elazar, that this shita of the chacham is the shita of Rabbi Elazar, and that is why, even though yes, his machshavas chutzes manu by shchita, which normally would be pigul, but in this sort of larger context of everything else going on in the Azara and Yom Kippur, it would not be, right, when there's still so much more that needs to happen, so it would not be considered pigul in this scenario, right? So again, man chacham Rabbi Elazar, so Rabbi Elazar, the Tanan that we learn in the Mishnah, hakometz v'alvona v'aktors u'minchas kohanim minchas kohen Mashiach u'minchas nisachim sheikrim me'achas men kazayis v'chutz chayv Rabbi Elazar poter hachakiv v'kulan. Fine. So Rabbi Elazar says you'll be poter unless you offer the entire kometz outside of the Azara, or outside of the Heichel, or at least, or maybe outside of the Azara, or at least, or at least if the rest of it was offered properly on the mizbeach, but you can't just have one kazayis out of context. But 1 second, asks the Gemara. There's another shita of Rabbi Elazar, another very interesting shita of Rabbi Elazar. Who can tell me what that shita is? Says the Gemara. V'amar Rava, says Rava. Umoda Rabbi Elazar. Rabbi Elazar admits b'domim when it comes to blood. The Tanakh that we learned in the Mishnah by Yom Kippur in Masechta Yoma. Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Shimon, Om says Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Shimon, mimakom shepasak misham hu maschil. What does that mean? Who wants to explain this to us? So this is talking about a scenario on Yom Kippur. The Kohen Gadol is doing the avodah in the Kodesh HaKodashim, and he's got to sprinkle 8 times, one above, 7 below. Let's say he's 3 sprinkles in, and all the blood spills on the floor. So what does he have to do? He has to bring a new animal, he has to slaughter it. The shaila is, does he have to start over? Or does he just pick up where he left off? So if he'd already done 3 sprinkles, so he starts by the 4th sprinkle. So the Chacham say he has to start all over again. The Chacham say he starts all over again. Rabbi Elazar and Rabbi Shimon say no need to start all over again, because each sprinkle is its own thing. And therefore, if you did the first 3 sprinkles, you could check those off, pick up from the 4th sprinkle. So yes, bring a new korban, right? All the blood spilled on the floor, bring a new animal, slaughter it. But when you go back into the Kodesh HaKodashim, just pick up where you left off, start with sprinkle number 4. What's important about that? What's important about that is that Rabbi Elazar is viewing the each piece of the blood, right? Each step of the way as its own avoda. And therefore, the question is, on the one hand, we saw the opinion of Rabbi Elazar, who said that even though a kazayis, when it comes to a mincha and a kometz, normally is significant, but because it's just one part of a bigger picture, therefore you'd be pater. On the other hand, we see that when it comes to the blood on Yom Kippur, each application of blood is not just considered to be like part of a bigger picture. Each application of blood is considered important of its own right, and therefore, if the blood spills on the floor after, let's say, 3 sprinkles, you pick up from number 4 because the first 3 were important on their own. And if that's the case, then we would say that this shchita, that if the Kohen Gadol did all of the applications of the blood in the Kodesh Kodashim, then it spilled on the floor, and now you bring a new korban, you're slaughtering it, that should be significant as an avodah in its own right. And I would say that Rabbi Elazar would say that you should be, that should be considered pigul. So again, what's going on here? To refocus. Rish Lakish had said that the opinion of Reb Meir is that everything goes based on the initial intention. However, we had seen that by Yom Kippur, whether he has machshava of chutz lezmano by the blood in the Kodesh HaKodashim, or whether he only has this machshava of chutz lezmano after that, in the second application of blood, it would still be pigul. So the question is, But I thought Rish Lakish said it. That's the daf could be at the beginning. So we said, well, it's talking about where the blood spilled on the floor. He's bringing a new korban. He's having machshavas chutz lizmano by the new korban. We said, but if that's the case, then why would the Chachamim say potter? If he's doing, if he's slaughtering with machshavas chutz lizmano, that should be chayiv shchita with machshavas chutz lizmano. So we still haven't. So that was a good question. We want to say he says like Rabbi Lazar, but we asked the question from a different Rabbi Lazar. So we're still trying to figure out how Rish Lakish would shtim with this brisa, which says that Reb Meir would say it's pigul, even if he has machshavas chutz lizmano by the second applications of blood. Ela Amar Rava rather says Rava kigon shepigel barishona. Aha. So he had machshavas chutz lizmano in the Kodesh HaKadoshim. Aha. V'shosak bashniya, and then by the matanos on the paroches in the heichol, he had no intention at all. V'chazu figa bashlishis, and then by the third, right, when it came to the Mizbeach Hazav, he once again had machshavas chutz lizmano. And that's what Reb Meir is talking about. He's saying that is pigul. I may have thought, well, that I may have thought, meaning to explain according to Rish Lakish, who says that really it goes based on the initial intention. And here, what are we talking about? What's the deal with this? Whether he had machshavas pigul by the first, by the second, by the third. It's talking about where he had machshavas pigul by the first sets of blood in the Kodesh HaKodashim. Then by the blood by the parochas, the second set, there was no machshav at all. Now, Rish Lakish says, it would explain to Reb Meir that it all goes based on the initial intention of pigul, which he had, where he had machshavas chutz lizmano in the Kodesh HaKodashim. And based on that, it should all go based on that intention that he, of machshavas chutz lizmano in the Kodesh HaKodashim, and all the rest of the blood, by default, would have machshavas chutz lizmano. However, what was interesting about this particular scenario is that then by the second applications of blood, he didn't have any intention at all. Okay, so we would assume that it's machshavas chutz lizmano also, because go based on the initial intention, which was chutz lizmano in the Kodesh HaKodashim. But then when it came to the blood on the Mizbeach Pnimi, the Mizbeach Hazov, he once again had intention of chutz lizmano, right? He said, I'm having my intention of chutz lizmano, to burn the emurim chutz lizmano. So what's peculiar about this is that if it was going based on the initial intent, then why did he reiterate his intention by step 3? Does that maybe imply that he didn't have machshavas chutz lizmano by step 2? So we say, right, so I may have thought that if we're saying, like Rish Lakish says, that we're going based on the initial machshav, the initial das, well then, then why did he feel the need by step number 3 to reiterate the chutz lizmano? Of course, by default, it's chutz lizmano. Once he had a chutz lizmano by the initial intention, it just all follows that it's chutz lizmano. So Kamash Malan, so nonetheless, what the Brisa is teaching is that yes, even though it's weird, you can argue that he had machshavas chutz lizmano, and then he had stam machshavas, and then he went back to once again machshavas chutz lizmano. It's okay. It's all just machshavas chutz lizmano, and it will still be pigul. That is the chiddush there. But again, we would explain according to Rish Lakish that Reb Meir's shita is that it's because the initial intention was pigul, and then even though by the second one there was no machshav at all, but then by the third he went back to machshavas chutz lizmano, it would still be pigul. We wouldn't raise any questions there to say maybe it's not pigul. Why did he change and go back? Anyways, okay. Maskif le Rav Ashi. However, Rav Ashi asks a question on Rav. Midi shosa katani. Rav Ashi says, wait, but it doesn't say anything in the Brisa about being quiet. Right? Rav said that in the Kodesh HaKodashim, yeah, machshavas chutz lizmano, but then by the paroches he didn't, but then by the Mizbeach Hazav he did. Says Rav Ashi, it doesn't say anything in the Brisa about not having an intention by step 2. Elam Rav Ashi. Rather, this is Rav Ashi. Can you hear what we're talking about? Kigon, for example. Shepigel, he had machshava of chutz lizmano. Barishona, in the Kodesh HaKadoshim. Uvashniya, and by the paroches. Uvashlishis, and by the kronos, the four horns of the Mizbach Hazav. But he did not have machshavas chutz lezmanu. He just had a stam machshav. He was beshtika. He was quiet when it came to the blood at the top, on the top of the Mizbach Hazav. Right, there are 4 applications of blood in the Kodesh Kodashim, and the rest are in the Heichal. The first one in the Heichal, so the second, meaning, the first of the blood is in the Kodesh Kodashim. The second is in the Heichal on the Paroches. The third is in the Heichal on the horns of the Mizbach Hazav, and the fourth is in the Heichal on top of the Mizbach Hazav. So he had machsheves, right? He says, I'm having machsheves chutz lezmano. He says this in the Kodesh Kodashim. He says it again by the Paroches. He says it again by the horns of the Mizbach Hazav. But he doesn't say it. He's quiet when it comes to the top of the Mizbach Hazav. So he just doesn't say anything there. So Kilu, when it came, so therefore the Brisa is saying, right, Bein Barishon, Bein Bashini, Bein Bashlish, right? So Rav Ashi is saying, what it's saying is that he had machshavas chutz lezmanu by the first step, by the second step, by the third step. But it doesn't say anything about the fourth step. He was quiet there. So my may have thought, so if we would say that anybody who does anything, it's based on the initial intention, and the initial intention was chutz lezmanu, or mahader pigule. Well, then why did he have to kind of reiterate by each one? Right? Meaning, if we're saying that what's the deal with the fourth one, where he didn't say anything, well, it's going based on the initial intention. Well, then, if he was quiet by the fourth one, he should have also been quiet by the second and third one. If we're saying that when he has machshavas chutz lezmanu in the Kodesh HaKodashim, well then, all of the rest of the damim is also going to be considered chutz lezmanu. So then why have machshavas chutz lezmanu again by the parochis, again by the karnos and mizbeach, and yet be quiet then on top of the mizbeach? Either have machshavas chutz lezmanu by all of the steps of the way, or just have it by the first one. Why reiterate it by the second and the third one? So Kamash Malan, it's coming to teach that nonetheless, good question, but we're still going to say that it is pigul. V'abein bein katoni. But one second. The Brisa doesn't say that it had machshavas chutz lezmanu by the Kodesh HaKodashim and by the Paroches and by the Karnos Mizbach Hazav. It doesn't say that. It says bein. It says either by this or by that or by that. Not all, but or. Kasha. It's taka a good question on Rav Ashi. So now the Gemara taka asks a kasha on the Mahalich that says that according to Reb Meir, Mefaglin Bechatzi Matir. Right, this is the whole question. How do we understand Reb Meir's Shita, right? Back in that Mishnah, in Menachis, by the Kometz and by the Levona, if you had machshavas chutz lezmanu by the Kometz, but not by the Levona, Reb Meir says, pigul v'chayiv kares. Chacham say, no, you have to have machshavas chutz lezmanu by both of them. And the shaila is, why does Reb Meir say that you're chayiv kares? Is it because, like Rish Lakish argues, and because the initial machshava was chutz lezmanu, or does he simply say Mefaglin Bechatzi Matir? That even partial machshavas chutz lezmanu is pigul. So if you hold that even just partial machshavas chutz lezmanu is pigul, well then I have a question for you, says the Gemara. Omer Mar. Reb Meir says, Reb Meir, pigul, v'chayiv an olav kares. So, Reb Meir had said, pigul v'chayiv, okay, one second, michdei, kares lo mechayiv achi yikarvu kol matir. Okay. I assume that he's talking about, Amanda Mahader, okay, fine. I assume that this is talking about, I don't know. This could either be talking about, I guess, the Mishnah from Mem Aleph Mid Beis, or it could be talking about the Brisa that we mentioned earlier on Yom Kippur with all the different Matirim. But anyways, Omer Mai, Reb Meir, Omer Pigul B'chayiv and Olav Kares. Reb Meir says that Red Pigul and Yechayiv Kares, and the question is because he says Mefaglin Bechatzi Matir or not? So Michdei. So if you say that Reb Meir holds Mefaglin Bechatzi Matir, Kares lo mechayev ad sheyikarvu kol matirav. Here is the thing, friends. When it comes to pigul, Chaver, how does pigul work? Chaver, let me ask you a question. See if you can answer this. See if you can answer it. It's an important question. I hope that everyone's going to get this right. If you slaughter a korban, with machshavas chutz zmano, you slaughter a korban with the intention that you're going to eat it outside of the time you're not allowed to eat it. Is it pigul yet? I feel like I gave away the answer in the question, so I hope everybody gets it right. Is it pigul yet? The answer is no. What do we say? Lo mechayev, karis lo mechayev ad sheyikarvu kol matirav. It's only going to be pigul once all of the matirin have been offered. So if you slaughter a korban with machshavas chutz zmanu, it's not yet pigul until after kabbalah sadam, malacha sadam, after zrika sadam, and now the korban is able to advance, to move forward. The kohanim can eat the meat. The emurim could be permitted to now be burnt on the mizbeach. At that point, it becomes pigul. So an important factor of pigul is that the matirin have to be properly offered in order for it to be pigul. As we said, kartzah is kosher, kachartzah is pos. Just like the, how do you define artzahs? I don't know, but just like the korbaning of a kosher, meaning what's the most important part of the korban when it's done properly? The zrika sadam, right? The korban atones at the zrika sadam. So kachartzah is pasul. Also, when it's pasul, when it's pigul, it'll only be pigul after the zrika sadam has been done properly, even if the dam is pasul, but the zrika sadam still needs to be done. Now, okay, so just like by a kosher, you need to do the zrika sadam, so also by a pasul. Now, the thing is, if you relate to the situation with Reb Meir as Mefaglin Bechatzi Matir, meaning that, for example, if you were to understand the brisa earlier, where Reb Meir says Bein Barishona, Bein Bashniya, Bein Bashlishis, so that means that, so if he goes into the Kodesh HaKodashim and he has machshavas chutz zmanu, and you're saying Mefaglin Bechatzi Matir, which means that even when he partially had machshavas chutz zmanu, it's already pigul. So meaning, according to the Chachamim, he would have to have machshavas chutz zmanu throughout. According to the Chachamim, the entirety of the matir, the entirety of the avodas adam would have to be machshavas chutz zmanu. So you're doing the entire zrika sadam with machshavas chutz zmanu. According to Reb Meir, if you say that kol ha'osal das rishono oses, so also you're doing the zrika sadam in the Kodesh HaKodashim with machshavas chutz zmanu, and that's defining all of the zrika sadam with machshavas chutz zmanu. But if you say that what's happening there is mefaglin bechatzi matir, that even if part of the zrika sadam is done with machshavas chutz zmanu, and then you have the rest of the dam is done without machshavas chutz zmanu, but now you basically have part of it has been done in a pasul way. Well, then basically from the time that, if you're basically compartmentalizing the zrikas adam, the avodas adam in that way, that part of it is chutz zmanu, part of it is not, and it could still be pigul, even though it was only part of it was chutz zmanu. But then, since part of the zrikas adam was done with machshavas chutz zmanu, it basically makes it makes it basically like there was no avodas adam, because part of it was chutz zmanu, part of it was not. You didn't have a proper matirin being offered. It was like kilu, part of it was this, part of it was that. If you say that the Chacham that the entirety of the Avodas Adam is being done with Machshavas Chutz Zmanu, okay, so you have the entire avoda of the Avodas Adam being done a certain way. But if you're saying Mefaglin Bechatzi Matir, that part of it is this, part of it is that, you don't have any Avodas Adam that was done in any particular way. You only have patchwork Avodas Adam. This was Chutz Zmanu, this was not. In which case, you don't actually have Matir, and so how are you actually going to have Pigel? But Kevon the Choshev Be Bifnim Pasle, that once you had Machshavas Chutz Zmanu, and you're saying Mefaglin Bechatzi Matir, so once you had Machshavas Chutz Zmanu in the Azar, in the Kodesh HaKodashim, Pasle. Okay, well, now already the Avodas Adam is possible. So Kamandalo Adi Dami, and now it's like there is no Zrikas Adam at all, because it's already possible. Ki Hadar Madi Beheichal, when he then goes out to the Heichal and starts doing Zrikas Adam on the Paroches, my ba'amu dekadi, he may as well just be throwing water because it's entirely irrelevant. In which case, there is no Zrikas Adam happening. In which case, how could there ever be Pigel? Because in order for there to be Pigel, there has to be a proper Zrikas Adam. Says Rabba, well, what if after the Avodas Adam in the Kodesh HaKodashim, all the blood spilled on the floor, and then you had to bring a new korban, and then after the Parochis, it all spilled on the floor, you had to bring a new korban. You had to bring 4 separate korbanos. So in that case, because you had 4 separate korbanos, so each one is considered significant in its own right, and therefore it's not considered, right? So therefore, yes, the first Zrikas Adam was with Machshavas Chutz Zmanu, and the rest were not with Machshavas Chutz Zmanu, but each was its own animal, and therefore each Zrikas Adam was significant in its own right, and it's considered like it was offered properly, and therefore it could be pigel. But however, Rava says, look, real quick. We're not so concerned. Because that's just kind of how pigel works. How does pigel work? Well, you slaughter a korban with machshavas chutz zmanu. Okay. So you slaughtered a korban, you had intention to eat it outside its proper time. You then do the kabbalah sadam, malachas sadam, zrikas sadam properly. So we don't say, well, all the rest of it's irrelevant because you already slaughtered it with machshavas chutz zmanu, and therefore it's like nothing, the rest of it didn't move forward. No. The Torah says that this is b'diuk how pigel works. That yes, even though from the very beginning you already had machshavas chutz zmanu, or let's say you did it by the kabbalah sadam or whatever, for one of the avodas you had machshavas chutz zmanu. The way that pigel works is that you then keep on doing it. You do the rest of the avodas properly, and then after Zrikas Adam, at that point it's pigel. That's just how it works. Part of it's going to be with machshavas chutz zmanu, part of it's not. And therefore, even if part of the avodas Adam is machshavas, so if you say Mefaglin Bechatzi Matir, it's not like, well, once you have machshavas chutz zmanu, then like all the rest of it's possible and it's irrelevant. No, that's the way that pigel works. The way pigel works is you're going to have parts that are with machshavas chutz zmanu, parts that aren't. But once everything has been completed, at the very end, we say, okay, because at some point you add machshavas chutz zmanu, it's going to be pigel. So Rava doesn't seem to have such an issue with like, well, once you go into the Kodesh HaKodashim and you have machshavas chutz zmanu, then all the rest of the avodas Adam is going to be irrelevant and puzzle. No, Rava is willing to say that that's just simply how pigel works, is that when you have machshavas chutz zmanu in one step of the way, that's going to determine it as pigel, even though the rest of it, you didn't have machshavas chutz zmanu. I buy in Vishalosh, now fact the Gemara, that we had said earlier that on Yom Kippur there are 43 applications of the blood. However, we learn about Arbaim V'Sheva. There's actually 47, not 43. Says the Gemara, "Commander Amar Ma'arvin Lekronos, but Commander Amar Ein Ma'arvin Lekronos." V'Tani Arbaim V'Shmona, but we said 48. Commander Amar Shirai Ma'akvin, Commander Amar Ein Shirai Ma'akvin. There are different counts that we have for the amount of applications of blood on Yom Kippur. We have 43, 47, 48. How do we get to these different numbers? Well, I had gone through the numbers earlier, right? You have 2 animals. You have a par, you have a sawyer. In the Kodesh HaKodashim, there's 8 for the cow, 8 for the sheep, or 8 for the goat. That's 16. Then by the paroches also, 8 for the cow, 8 for the goat, another 16. You're up to 32. When it comes to the Mizbach Hazov, and the applications of blood on the Karnos Mizbach Hazov, So according to one opinion, at that point you mix together the blood of the cow and of the goat, and from the mixture you add another, you apply it to the four corners. So now you're up to 36, and then on top of the Mizbech Hazav another 7, you're up to 43. But there's a different opinion that says that you don't mix the two bloods together, and you apply the blood to the four corners of the Mizbech HaPnimi separately. In which case, when you're at 32, you're then adding another 4 for the blood of the cow on the Mizbech Hazav, and another 4 for the blood of the goat on the Mizbech Hazav. So you go from 32 to 36 to 40, and then another 7 on the top of the Mizbech. That gets you to 47. So we had 43 if you mix them together, 47 if you don't mix them together, and you have 48. We saw Machlokes, was it yesterday or the day before, between Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Yehuda about, by the Par Yom Kippurim, is pouring the Shirayim on the Yisod of the Mizbech Ma'akev or not? According to Rabbi Yehuda, it is Ma'akev. And if it's Ma'akev, then that's the 48th, is pouring the Shirayim on the Yisod of the Mizbech. So let's read that again. Arboim v'shalosh. What do you mean 43? We had said 47. It depends. If you mix together the blood of the cow and of the goat for the Mizbach Hazav, well, then you have 43. If you keep them separate, you have 47. But 1 second, we also learn 48. Also, if you say that you have to pour the shiraim on the yisod, like Rabbi Yehuda, so you have 48. But if you hold like Rabbi Akiva, that you don't have to pour the shiraim on the yisod, well then you have 47. Now, Fregdi Gemara Meisvei, now we have a final question on Rish Lakish, and with this, we wrap up today's daf and get to the next Mishnah. Meisvei, we have a question. Bamed dvar mamurim b'kmitza b'matan klu v'hiluch aval balo la'aktora nosen es hakomes b'machshava v'salvono b'shtika o shenosen es hakomes b'shtika v'salvono b'machshava b'meir o pigo v'chavin of kars ha'chom om and mokars achi fago b'chol matir. Okay, interesting. So here, a korban mincha is taka very interesting, because a korban mincha has two matirin. You see, when it comes to a korban behema, a korban from an animal, so there's the blood. The blood is matir, right? There's zrikas adam. There's a shrita, kabbalah, halacha, zrika, mutter. Now you can eat the meat. You can burn the emurim. By a minchas nedava, for example, there's actually two matirin. There's haktaras hakomets, there's the burning of the komets, but there's also the burning of the levona, of the frankincense, as we've been discussing recently. But what's interesting is that while by the frankincense, by the levona, there is just the burning of it. That's what you got to do. You got to burn it. By the komets, of course, as we know, there's 4 steps that are parallel to the 4 avodas hadam by a korban, by an animal. Right, by an animal, there's shchita, kabbalah, halacha, zrika. By kmitza, there's kmitza, nesina bekli, holacha, and haktara. So the interesting thing is that when it comes to haktara, so there's 2 matirin. So therefore, let's say you have machsheves chutz lizmano, both by burning the komets and by burning the levona. So of course that would be pigel. Now when it comes to kmitza, taking the fistful, nesina bakli, putting it in a kli sharis, holacha, bring that up to the mizbeach, those are relevant only to the komets. They are not relevant to the levona. The only part that's relevant to the levona is the burning. So interestingly, if you take the fistful, or if you put it in the kli, or bring it to the mizbeach with machsheves chutz lizmano, well, that alone would be enough to make pigel, since there is no corresponding avoda by the levona. But if we're talking about burning on the mizbeach, well, there it's shared between the komets as well as levona. So the question is, what happens if you only had machsheves chutz lizmano by the komets but not by the levona, or vice versa? So again, by the other steps, by the kmitza, by the putting in the kli, by the holacha, there is no levona counterpart. So having machsheves chutz lizmano just by the mincha would be sufficient. But when it comes to the burning, where you also burn the levona. So then there's a question of, do you have to have intention for both, etc. So now, again, Meisve, we have a contradiction. When do we say that machshavas chutz zmano alone, right? By meaning for only the kmitza is sufficient. The kmitza, that's by taking the fistful, b'matan kli, putting it in the vessel, uvehiluch, and bringing that to the mizbeach, because there's no parallel avoda by the levona. Aval balu laktara, but when it comes to burning, so machshavas chutz zmano by burning, nosen es hakomes b'machshava v'salavona b'shtika, if he burnt the komets with machshavas chutz zmano, but the levona b'shtika, he didn't say anything. Now here's the interesting part, Chaver, listen up. O shenosen es hakomets b'shtika v'salavona b'machshava. Or, Chaver, listen to this. This is like the climax of what we began with yesterday and we've been working through today. If the komets was offered b'shtika, he didn't say anything. But then by the levona, you had machshavas chutz lizmano. Rav Meir Omer pigol v'chayin alav kares. Rav Meir says pigol. Chavi, did you hear that? Rish Lakish has been arguing. We've been going back and forth. Rish Lakish says that according to Rav Meir, he doesn't simply say Mefaglin Bechatzi Matir. Rather, Kol ha'osa achar adas rishonu osa. That it's because the initial machshava was chutz lizmano. But if the initial machshava was chutz l'mkomo, if the initial machshava was b'shtika, right? If it was initially b'shtika and chutz lizmano came later, Rish Lakish argues that Rav Meir would not say that it's pigul. And yet here we have a brisa where we're saying nosen es hakomes b'shtika v'salavona b'machshava. Initially he was quiet, and then he had machshavas chutz lizmano. Rav Meir Omer pigul v'chayav an olav kares. Rav Meir says it's pigul. Whereas the Chacham say no, it's only going to be kares. You would have to have machshavas chutz lizmano both by the komets and by the levona. But katani mia es hakomes b'shtika v'salavona b'machshava ufalig. But as I pointed out, the brisa says that if the komets was quiet and the levona was chutz lizmano, it would be pigul, even though the initial step was not pigul. So the Gemara makes a last ditch effort to save Rish Lakish's approach. Ema, I'll say kvar nosen es halavona b'machshava. That I'll say that the komets is b'shtika and kvar nosen es halavona b'machshava. I.e., he had already offered the levona with machshavas chutz lizmano, and only afterwards was the komets b'shtika. But Chada, question number one on that is Reisha, the Hainu Reisha. First of all, then that makes that then what's the chiddush? The first part already said that if the komets was chutz lizmano and the levona is b'shtika, so then it's pigul. Why do I need another example of that where the levona was chutz lizmano and the komets was b'shtika? It's the same thing. The first part was chutz lizmano, the next part was b'shtika. Why do I need to say the same thing twice? Ve'od, and here's the knockout. Hatanya, we have a brisa in which it says achar kach, i.e., it says shenosen es hakomes b'shtika v'achar kach es halavona b'machshava. We have a brisa in which it's explicit that it says that first the komets was b'shtika and only afterwards the levona was b'machshavas chutz lizmano, and still we're saying Rav Meir says chayiv kares kasha. That is a great question because it seems to be pretty clear from that brisa that Rav Meir says that it's pigul even when initially he was quiet and only afterwards he had machshavas chutz lizmano, and not like Rish Lakish has been arguing that Rav Meir only says pigul when the initial intention was chutz lizmano. Friends, that was Daf Mem Beis of Masechta Zevachim. So on Daf Mem Beis we really worked through the different approaches to Rav Meir's shita when it comes to, does he say Mefaglin Bechatzi Matir? Or is like Rish Lakish argues that no, Idafka says Kol ha'osa adas rishono ose. We brought that brisa from Yom Kippur with the different steps, and Rav Meir says that Bein barishona, Bein bashniya, Bein bashlisha. So it sounds like not based on the initial intention, because even if by the second one he has machshavas chutz zmano, we tried to give different answers for that. We didn't really get amazing answers. We then asked the question on the approach that says Mefaglin Bechatzi Matir, based on but if that's the case, then if he has machshavas chutz zmano in the Kodesh HaKadoshim, then doesn't it make the whole avodas adam possible? In which case, how do you have any Matir? And we said, well, maybe that could just be part of the pigul. Then we had a final knockout on Rish Lakish, seemingly that we seem to have a brisa which says pretty clearly that Rameir says pigul even when initially it wasn't machshavas chutz zmano. I don't know. It sounds like cumulatively we had a harder time kind of backing up Rish Lakish's position, and at the end there it seems like, I don't know where I'm standing now. It would seem like according to Rameir we would say sounds like his position is Mefaglin Bechatzi Matir. Friends, that was Daf Mem Gimel of Masechta Zevachim. Hope you enjoyed. Cheers.